Hello everyone, and welcome to the 21st rip-off episode of Analyzing Evil, featuring Anthony Daniels from Star Wars. If you've been around, you might be asking why I'm making yet another video on Anthony Daniels. Well, with the countless comments sharing their own personal experiences with the guy, I think it's time for a proper episode. I wasn't going to feature him on Analyzing Evil, but now knowing that I got off easy compared to other people, and that my story wasn't a one-off case, and was only the tip of the iceberg, I don't see why we can't jump back into this guy. If you haven't seen my previous video, you might be asking why I'm going after a legend of the original trilogy. How dare I? Aren't I a champion of real Star Wars? Yeah, well, Anthony Daniels, believe it or not, lives in his own stuck-up fantasy land where he's extremely important, despite being known for only one pissing role. A role he has reprised more than any other actor in Star Wars, because as it turns out, he wouldn't have any more work if not for that. Even Mark Hamill has more external relevance than him these days. Mark Hamill voiced the Joker, and being a fan of regular show, I like Skips too. But Anthony Daniels has nothing aside from C-3PO, and he reflects that in his douchiness. Now a quick recap. I flew up to Brisbane to go to a convention and attended a Q&A panel with Anthony Daniels. Someone on my Discord server wanted me to ask him about his cameo in the Young Indy Chronicles. But Daniels cut me off mid-question with "wrong movie" and then pointed at someone else to answer. Yeah, I wasn't feeling good after that, and it ruined my whole trip, especially after learning that Daniels was only here on his own strict stuck-up terms, where it was all about him and nobody else. And he also shut down another person who tried asking him about the 1978 Lord of the Rings animated film, even though it was completely relevant because he was in it, as was my attempted question. Even today, I'm still perplexed. Because wouldn't you think Indiana Jones and Lord of the Rings would be a nice change of pace? And you'd be a little more appreciative of someone who knows you for something that isn't just Star Wars and C-3PO. That's what I thought before I asked the question, and I still think that. But again, compared to other people's accounts of meeting him, I got off easy. Having my question shut down just because it wasn't about Star Wars is rude, especially in the way Daniel shut it down. But there are literally more blatant instances of him being far worse than that. Here's a collection of 4 stories people told me in the comment section of my previous video. Are you ready? Here we go. Story 1 is a more recent comment. This user recites when Daniels attended the Prague Comic Con in the Czech Republic. He also shut down people asking him questions unless they were super C-3PO centric. Which, hearing that, he must have been in a better mood in Brisbane, because he did at least answer a question about who his favorite character was besides C-3PO. But you want to know what his answer was? Oh, I can't really come up with one besides 3PO. I'm paraphrasing, but that's what he said. The commenter also recounts how he, no joke, insulted the intelligence of people who had a handmade C-3PO statue that they showed him, calling it trash.
Wow, what an asshole.
And basically, he had a selective taste in fans, because he clearly just saw them as moronic sheep. He was also advertising his book way too much. Story 2 happened in London, and the guy who commented recites how the place he was at was promoting the Phantom Menace, and Anthony Daniels was there. Only problem was, nobody recognized him, and he was walking around waiting for someone to recognize him, which to me is both funny and sad. Anyways, the commenter was like the first person to recognize him, but refused to sign scraps of paper that he had, and ended up taking a petty photo, which the commenter says was never developed. Gee, I wonder why. Story 3 recites the time the commenter wanted to say hi to him, but the staff flat out lied for Daniels that he was going to be leaving the convention, but he was there for the next 3 hours when the expo hall closed. Gee. Story 4 has the commenter state that he attended Star Wars Celebration 2007, and Anthony Daniels didn't feel like adding a quote to the photo he was signing. Something which every other guest had no problem with. Which reminds me of waiting in line to get my Funko Pop signed, and the staff told me he didn't feel like putting a quote on the side. Which at the time I assumed it was because he was busy with a trillion other people, but no. It was because he was lazy and didn't feel like it. And the main thing I heard about him is that Ian McDiarmid was a bigger dick. Okay, I think there were 1 or 2 comments reciting a nicer story with him, but come on. Honestly, I wish I just met the actual robot, which may or may not be possible now with the rise of artificial intelligence. And hopefully they just clone his voice and design a robot that has the same personality as 3PO, you know? Daniels has such an overinflated ego because he played a golden robot, who was a supporting character who did nothing. A lot of the other comments have accounts on how the late Kenny Baker, aka R2-D2, did not get along with him. And in fact, Anthony Daniels mistreated him. Oh, and by the way, I've got an account stating that Ray Park, David Prowse, Jeremy Bullock, and Kenny Baker are actually appreciative of their fans and deserve to be in the opposite series analyzing good. And I'm happy to consider them for episodes in that series. Still, people condemned Anthony Daniels for being overly cocky despite being known for one character. But you know what? I cared. I cared that he was C-3PO. I don't discriminate on what role you played. If you were in Star Wars and you're not a bitch like Amanda Stenberg, I'd be happy to meet you, even if I didn't like your character, because that's common courtesy. It's called being nice. I'd reserve my ranting for the characters and the writers who set out to insult the audience if they did so. C-3PO is far from my favorite Star Wars character, but you know, I enjoyed his character and the back and forths he had with R2. He was an ironic saving grace of TCW, as I seem to only enjoy the droids and their banter at a consistent rate, even if 3PO was mostly in filler episodes. I didn't care that he had a supporting role and that he was nobody's favorite character. I wanted to see him, and thought it was an opportunity to get the 3PO Funko Pop, which I had possessed for years at that point, signed. Know what I'm saying? Anthony Daniels doesn't even have huge successes to inflate his ego. He didn't even like Star Wars when he was doing Star Wars. If not for George Lucas, he would be nobody. And without the fans, he'd be nothingness. And you know, I wouldn't have cared otherwise, but guess what? Despite being there from the very beginning, he sold out George Lucas and promoted J.J. Abrams' practical effects rubbish for The Force Awakens, and is yet another prequel hater. That's extra egregious, I think, because he should absolutely know better. Why is it when the prequels came out, those who knew more of the real story didn't back him up? Why did they just conform to the super simplistic, incredibly outdated, and false narratives about the prequel trilogy? Especially for Anthony Daniels, who was quite literally in all of the movies, as well as a billion trillion different projects because he has nothing else to do. Yeah, that's how you know he turned his back on George, because if not for him, he wouldn't even have continuous work as an actor. So it just comes across as disingenuous and ungrateful. As low as Mark Hamill sank, at least he didn't turn his back on George Lucas on the spot. Seriously, this is when George needed support more than ever, and we might not have gotten the backtracking mess that was the Clone Wars if those who worked with him were a little more supportive. Again, I wouldn't have cared that much, but knowing that he's both a douche and a complete sellout, you can't just say it was fear that drove him to not back Lucas up. It was selfishness, plain and simple. Now, in spite of all that, I can at least still watch Star Wars and not flip my shit whenever I see C-3PO, because at least I can't see the actor's smug face. And believe me, I tested myself against a LEGO Star Wars special that C-3PO was heavily featured in, and I wasn't bothered. I did think a lot about how the machine was better than the man, and in a way it's actually poetic. You might have heard the symbolism about how C-3PO was built by the one who would eventually become Darth Vader, who was cold and ruthless. But C-3PO was much more human than a droid deserved. Ironically, because when Vader was the child slave Anakin Skywalker, he was far more optimistic and kind, and it rubbed off in 3PO. Well, the real life symbolism is that if you had a choice at meeting C-3PO or the guy who played C-3PO, do yourself a favor, meet the actual C-3PO plain and simple. Because ultimately, Anthony Daniels is pure, shameless evil. Thank you for listening to this episode of Analyzing Evil. What do you think of Anthony Daniels? Leave your thoughts below. I'm JJ Plagiarisms. And until next time, what are stories but mystery boxes?
Under the mountain, a golden fountain. Were you praying at the